And at the end of the last lecture, I said that one of the ways in which the small intestine is adapted to do its functions is by having a large increase in surface area compared to what it would be with just a simple cylinder. And so I talked last time briefly about these folds, the villi, these roughly 1 millimeter finger-like projections sticking into the lumen, and each of the cells on here covered by microvilli, which are about 1 micrometer in length. Now, the structure isn't the same throughout the whole of the small intestine. You see these villi, they're more exaggerated in the first part, the proximal part of the small intestine. They're longer and they're closer together. And as you go down the length of the small intestine, the villi are still present, but they get smaller and not quite so crowded together. So this gives you a clue that most of these steps of digestion and absorption, not all of them, but most of them, are taking place in the proximal part of the small intestine. And in an earlier figure, we talked about I mentioned the three main areas, regions of the small intestine: the duodenum, which is the first portion, the jejunum, and the ileum. And there's no abrupt change in the structure or the function of these three different areas. So, in a sense, functionally, physiologically, it's easier or it's maybe more appropriate to talk about the proximal and the distal regions. We also looked last time at the structure of one of these villi, shown over here, and I mentioned various cell types, and I'm going to go on in more detail today to talk about their functions. And I also talked about this rich capillary blood supply within the villus, and also these lacteals, lymphatic vessels. And we'll see these two are both important in the absorption of the end products. So the question then is, how are substances dealt with, food substances dealt with in the small intestine? The main ones I am going to consider are carbohydrates and proteins and fats. Might mention a couple of vitamins and water and some electrolytes. And there's all sorts of other things that we take in our diets that there just isn't time to talk about. So, how does the small intestine, let's say, deal with carbohydrates? And I'm going to do carbohydrates first, and then I'm going to do proteins, and then I'm going to do fats. And I'd like to start off with a question to you. I'm going to tell you that carbohydrates and proteins are handled in the small intestine in a somewhat similar sort of way. The different enzymes and the details are different. But the general way in which carbohydrates and proteins are dealt with is somewhat similar. Whereas fats, their breakdown, their absorption is quite different. Even now, can you tell me why that is? Yes?
Because it's not soluble in water?
Yes. So the key word here is, just suggested, is the solubility. Carbohydrates and proteins are water soluble. So they're happily in an aqueous environment, but they're not happily in a liquid environment. So for getting across cell membranes, you need special transport processes. So when I talk about carbohydrates and proteins, we'll see that there's essentially no problem in getting them through the lumen of the small intestine, which is an aqueous environment. But there is a potential problem in transporting them across the cell membranes into those absorptive cells, the enterocytes. Whereas fats and the fat digestion products are just the other way around. They are at home, sometimes an expression that people use, they're at home, they're comfortable, they are able to dissolve in fatty environments, but not in an aqueous one. So we have to have special mechanisms for dealing with water insoluble material, the fatty substances, as they're moving through the lumen. But when it comes to the fatty end products actually going across cell membranes and into the absorptive cells, it's, I wouldn't say it's simpler, but maybe somewhat more straightforward, easier. So we'll keep that in mind as we go through these. So starting with carbohydrates, what's happened to carbohydrates so far? The main carbohydrate in probably most people's diets is starch. Plant starch is a mixture of amylose, which is a straight chain, lots of glucoses joined together end to end, plus amylopectin, which is similar to amylose, except that it also has got branching points. The side branches, 1,6 alpha linkages there. And the enzymes that, and this is partly a summary of review, salivary amylase, pancreatic amylase have acted on the starch, and the end products so far are maltose, a disaccharide, maltotriose, trisaccharide, so 2 or 3 glucoses linked together, plus alpha-linic dextrins. We haven't come across any mechanism so far that's able to break down those branching points. So these alpha-linic dextrins are oligosaccharides, roughly 5 to 8 glucoses joined together, and so with the branching points. So that's one of the main carbohydrates in the diet, but we have others, and the other main ones are sucrose, table sugar, which is a disaccharide, and milk sugar, lactose, also a disaccharide. So what is being presented to the small intestine at this point is a mixture of the maltose, maltotriose, the alpha-linic dextrins, the sucrose, and the lactose. And so far, the only enzymes that have played a role are enzymes that are sometimes called bulk enzymes. They're present in the bulk of the gastric juice, not gastric, the salivary juice, the pancreatic juice. Things that have been secreted into the lower GI tract contain these enzymes. But the story has to continue with breakdown because the only form in which carbohydrates can be absorbed is as monosaccharides. We haven't got that we haven't got any significant amounts of those yet. We've got di, tri, and bigger saccharides. So there has to be something else which breaks those down. And there is. The ones that I've highlighted here, these enzymes here. So the question is, where do these enzymes come from? Are they secreted by the small intestine? Remember that the crypts of Leverkusen produce an intestinal juice. If you analyze that intestinal juice, you find that these enzymes are not present there in any significant amounts. So where are they? They've got to be somewhere there. They are present in the cell membrane of the enterocytes. So to come back to this one, the details of what happens, but this is something I think that's very important for you to grasp. And I know that sometimes it's not a difficult concept, but it's, if you haven't done this before, it may be a bit unusual. And sometimes people don't quite grasp the idea. So this figure shows you where these enzymes are. They're called brush-border enzymes. So we're looking again at the villus. Here's the crypts. Here's the villus. The lumen would be up at the top here. If you take one of these cells again, an enterocyte, here it's got its microvilli, which I said was called the brush-border membrane. It looks like that under the microscope. And then if you just look at a portion of this brush-border cell membrane, which is the membrane, this is the width of the membrane here, extracellular fluid, so this is the lumen, inside the cell here, you see that there are brush-border enzymes forming part of this membrane. And these brush-border enzymes exert their action on the final steps of food breakdown, of digestion, while those enzymes remain an integral part of that cell membrane. So examples of these brush-border enzymes to do with carbohydrate digestion are these ones that are shown here, something called maltase. Maltase surprisingly acts on maltose. It breaks it down to glucose. Maltase acts on maltotriose, breaks it down to glucose. But it cannot act on branching points, you need what is called a debranching enzyme, which is this one alpha dextrinase. Now, the note at the bottom here tells you actually a little bit more complicated than that. Alpha dextrinase and another enzyme, another brush border enzyme called sucrase, are actually single molecules with different regions with quite different activities. So strictly it's these subunits. The bit that is relevant up here is the part of the molecule called alpha dextrinase, which is able to attack those branching points. And it splits these oligosaccharides down into, again, glucose. This enzyme can also work on maltose and maltotriose. And again, it's the, presumably, the alpha dextrinase part. Actually, I'm not sure about that. But anyways, one or other part of this enzyme is also able to act on maltose and maltotriose. But only the alpha dextrinase part can act on alpha-linolextrins. Does anybody know from biochemistry who's done this? Which bit acts on the other two? No, I should find out. Okay. Now, the other thing is that the sucrase part of that molecule acts on sucrose, and it breaks it down to glucose and fructose. Those are the two monosaccharides that make up table sugar. And then another brush border enzyme, lactase, breaks down lactose to glucose and galactose. So all of these ones that I've highlighted there in yellow are present here as brush border enzymes. I mean, there's lots of different ones scattered throughout our brush border membrane. So although we have lots of different starting materials, we actually end up with a relatively small number of monosaccharides. All these things on the right-hand side are monosaccharides. We have glucose, we have fructose, and we have galactose. So these are being produced on the extracellular face of the brush border membrane, very close to it. And what happens to them next is that they are transported across that membrane by special transport systems. Because they themselves cannot just dissolve in the membrane, you have to have transporters represented here, close by the enzymes, the brush border enzymes. So you've got a very close spatial relationship between the brush border enzymes involved in the final steps of carbohydrate digestion, and right next door to them, you've got these transport systems which can take up these monosaccharides and put them into the cell. Okay, so which transport systems am I talking about? Okay, what do we have? Looking now, going back to our whole cell, here's the brush border membrane here. In this case, I'm not showing the brush border enzymes, just showing the transport systems. So we're assuming that those brush border enzymes have done their job. We've ended up with a mixture of glucose, galactose, and fructose, the three main monosaccharides, which are present in the lumen. And the way in which they get across the apical membrane into the cell is shown here, and then how they get across the basolateral membrane, ultimately into the blood, is on the right-hand side. Let's start with glucose and galactose. We put those together because they actually compete with each other for a particular transport system. And this is one you've come across, I think, in the kidney. SGLT number 1 in this case, sodium coupled glucose transporter. And what happens, we know that sodium binds to this transport molecule, glucose or galactose can compete with another binding site on there, and the downhill movement of sodium into the cell drives the uptake of glucose or galactose along with it. And this can be either downhill or it can be an uphill movement of glucose or galactose into the cell. And sodium levels inside the cell are kept low, allowing for this downhill gradient, inward downhill gradient, by the usual sodium-potassium pump on the basolateral membrane. Fructose, as you can see, is quite different. It's taken up by a member of the GLUT family, glucose transporters. And this is facilitated diffusion. You don't need soda. And remember, it's fructose being there by facilitating diffusion or transport. Once you've got these monosaccharides into the cell, some may be used by the cell for its own purposes, but the others are absorbed and transported across the basolateral backside of the cell by another member, again facilitated, another member of that GLUT2 family, or that GLUT family called GLUT2. And off these monosaccharides go in the blood and around the body and taken to the liver and then stored or used or converted or whatever is needed at that particular moment. So if you understand this, the story for proteins is very similar. Oh, no, I'm sorry, one more thing. You don't have this figure, but let me just explain. I think it's something that's relatively new. Some of this, I think, has been discovered by people with an association with physiology at the UMA, and it's probably very important. The top part of this figure, and I'll move it up in a moment, the top part of this figure is just really a simplified version of this. So you've got the cell again, apical border, SGLT1, sodium, glucose, both binding to it, indose glucose, pushed out the back by GLUT2. And this is probably what happens in between meals. You eat a meal, say the carbohydrate in it, you absorb it, and then as you absorb it, of course, there's less and less glucose remaining behind in the lumen because it's being taken up into the blood. And this means that when you have low glucose in the lumen, you need mainly an active transport process to take it up against its gradient. As glucose is absorbed, the glucose in here will become higher initially, and this will become lower because you're taking it up. So you need some active transport process, secondary active transport, to take up that glucose. But what happens after you eat a meal? Then you have a high concentration of glucose in the urine, in the lumen, and you still have this SGLT1. But what people now suggest is that some of these GLUT2 transporters can be translocated from the basolateral membrane. They move across and are inserted in the apical membrane. So that when you have a lot of glucose in the lumen, you're able to use mainly the facilitated type of transport here and also here. So at high glucose concentrations, it's mainly the GLUT2. At intermediate dry use, you probably use both of them. And when you've got very low glucose, if you're trying to scavenge to rescue that last little bit of glucose that's in the lumen, then you need to have the traditional, this is the one that's probably in most textbooks still, the classical SGLT1 absorber. And it can also take the glucose down gradients as well as up, so it can still work. But in addition, you have this one. So I think that's maybe a slightly more up-to-date view of what's going on than you might get in some textbooks will probably have it not. Okay, so as I just started to say, if you understand that, then the general idea is very similar for proteins. So figure number 56 summarizes the digestion and absorption of proteins. What's happened to them so far? proteins present in the food, and the red dots lined up here representing the amino acids for proteins. We've come across proteolytic enzymes in gastric juice, pepsin, produced from pepsinogen. In pancreatic juice, a whole array of them. Trypsin, produced from trypsinogen under the influence of angiokinase. Trypsin then activates itself. Trypsin activates other proteolytic enzymes, chymotrypsinogen, carboxypeptidases, and so on. And the action of these gastric and pancreatic enzymes is to produce a mixture of some free amino acids, single red dot, and also smallish peptides. Now, the difference here. Carbohydrates can only be absorbed after they've been broken down all the way to monosaccharides. Proteins don't have to be broken down all the way. Amino acids certainly are produced and are absorbed, but small peptides can also be absorbed. Dipeptides, tripeptides can be absorbed. Disaccharides and trisaccharides cannot be, but peptides can. But the initial peptides that are produced are still probably too big to be absorbed. So they have to be broken down to small peptides, and there are peptidases present as brush border enzymes. So the concept of things like sucrase, the lactase, and so on, the alpha-dextrinase present in our brush border. If you extend that a bit further and say there's also peptidases, brush border peptidases, these act on these medium-sized peptides, let's say, and break them down to dipeptides, tripeptides, and more amino acids. And again, because these things need special transport systems, we can think back to what happened with the carbohydrate end products, special transporters there, and as there are here. One thing is, of course, that we have probably a lot more different amino acids, 20 or so amino acids, than we have common monosaccharides. So there are multiple peptidases, there are multiple amino acid transporters in this brush border membrane. I'm not going to go into details here. You've got the different families of amino acids, neutral, acidic, basic, whatever, aliphatic, aromatic, and so on. And there are probably different, and there's probably some overlap, but also lots of different amino acid transport systems. Some of these, as it says here, are sodium dependent, like the SGLT1. Some of them are absorbed by secondary active transport, and others by some facilitated type of movement, which is independent of sodium. But what's, I think, particularly interesting are the transporter for these small peptides, dimetrile-peptides. As far as I know, not sure how absolutely up to date, but relatively recently anyway, there's only been shown to be one peptide transporter, which is a bit surprising. And I think, at least from what I read recently, the physiologists in this area don't really understand how this can be. You've got multiple different types of dimethyl peptides, and yet it seems that there is only one transporter, so it must have a wide specificity of what it recognizes to pick up and carry across. And it's called PEP1. And notice that it is a hydrogen proton peptide co-transporter. Not sodium, as we saw for SGLT1, not sodium as we saw for the amino acid transporter, but a hydrogen peptide co-transporter. These peptides that are taken up into the cell, the dimethyl peptides, end up as being amino acids because there are intracellular peptidases for the very final step in their breakdown. families of amino acid transporters, some probably sodium dependent and some independent on the basolateral membrane, to take the amino acids ultimately into the blood. So just coming back to this idea of having peptide transporters on the apical membrane, why is that significant? Well, one can make, oh no, let's start with the question of, is this important or is it just a sort of curiosity? It's probably actually very important, and it's said that for some amino acids, and I don't often know which ones, but some amino acids, their uptake is more effective, more efficient, if they're taken up in the form of di- or tripeptides and then broken down, rather than if you have the free amino acid itself being taken up. So it does seem that there's some important physiological significance to this peptide transport system. And it also means that in some clinical situations, if a person has, for example, a defect in a transporter for certain amino acids, as sometimes happens, so that they're not able to take up amino acid X, because there's a problem with the transporter for X, what can be done is you give X in the form of a dipeptide, and it can then be taken up. So it's a way of sort of bypassing a defect that otherwise might cause problems. Okay, so those are the two groups, carbohydrates and proteins, which show some similarities in the sense that both of these are quite comfortable moving through the aqueous environment. Both of them require final breakdown through brush-border enzymes, and both of them require special transport systems to get them into and also out of the absorptive cell, and they both ultimately end up in the blood drainage. Fats, quite different. Let's look and see what happens with fats. And because this is very complicated, I have summarized most of what I'm going to be saying in a later figure. I won't put that figure up, but if you miss something, it's quite likely to be there. So we're taking fats in the diet. We've got these globules of fat, visible naked eye. What has happened to them so far? I did mention, I sort of skimmed over it, but I said, yes, there is a lipase that you can find in the mouse, lingual lipase. There's a lipase that comes in gastric juice, gastric lipase, but they're not usually considered to be of relatively minor importance. And it's not until you come to pancreatic juice, pancreatic lipase, that you really have a major fat digesting enzyme. But it's too soon to be talking about fat digestion just yet, because you've got a big lump of fat in the diet, and if the enzyme, in order to break it down, sits on its surface, it doesn't really have a good chance of digesting a large globule with little enzymes sitting on the surface. Is not an efficient way of allowing that enzyme to digest the fats. So what you need to do first is to increase the surface area where the enzyme is going to be sitting and doing its job. So the first step is a physical or a mechanical breakdown of fats called emulsification. And if you think of, let's say you had a meal with pork chops with a lot of fat on them, and it's congealed on your plate, it's made a mess, and it's time to wash the dishes. What do? Maybe you put them in a machine and agitation there, or you do it under the tap, big squirt of detergent, mix it all around, and break down the fat and clean the plate. Well, same sort of idea here. You need mixing, agitation, and you need detergent-like molecules. The mixing comes in part from stomach activity, those churning and mixing and grinding cell actions in the stomach help to break down fats, and also motility movements in the small intestine, which I'll talk about later. Detergent-like molecules are things like bar salts, so amphipathic molecules can act as detergents. So these relatively large globules are then broken down to really small emulsion droplets, less than a micrometer, and this greatly increases the surface area available for the pancreatic lipase to do its job. It then sits on the surface and starts digesting away. But there's a problem, yet another problem here, and that is that pancreatic lipase becomes inactivated in the presence of bile salts, which sort of seems a bit odd because I'm just emphasizing that these things need to work together. But that is what happens. So you've got a droplet, an emulsion droplet. If you just had pancreatic lipase moving to the surface, remember the bile salts there acting as a detergent, then that pancreatic lipase doesn't work well. And what you need is a cofactor, colipase, which I'm not going into details here, but in the presence of colipase as well, it allows the lipase to be active. So what does pancreatic lipase do in the presence of colipase? Which, by the way, colipase also comes from the pancreas. What does it do? The main substrate is or are triglycerides. And triglycerides are made up of a backbone here of glycerol, and attached to that in positions 1, 2, and 3 are fatty acids. And the main type of fat in most people's diets is composed of triglycerides containing long-chain fatty acids. Long chain meaning about 12 or more carbons in the fatty acid. As you can see here, what the pancreatic lipase does is to split off the top and the bottom fatty acids, leaving number 2 behind. So the end products of the action of pancreatic lipase on triglycerides is a mixture of free fatty acids, which would be chopped off, and what are called 2 monoglycerides, 1 fatty acid in the number 2 position. Now, what about other fats? I'm not going to talk about those. I think it's enough to follow through what happens to these triglycerides. But other fats with other enzymes, phospholipases, cholesterol esterases, and so on, are also broken down. So we had a bit of a problem already. Fats are very poorly soluble in water. We have to use emulsification, mechanical breakdown, before you can have chemical breakdown. Once you've got these end products, the 2 monoglycerides and the free fatty acids, again, these are poorly soluble in water. And if you just allow them to accumulate, they separate out into an oily phase. You know what happens if you try and mix oil and vinegar? You can shake it, it sort of makes, but if you let it sit, they will separate out. The same sort of thing would happen here. So we have to have some way of solubilizing these end products of breakdown while they are still in the aqueous environment of the small intestine. So we're looking here at the enterocyte, apical on your left-hand side. Here's the lumen on the left. right-hand side basolateral membrane here. And this is where we come back to this idea of micelles. A micelle, remember, is a small structure which has got amphipathic bile salt molecules on its surface. I talked about the mixed micelles that are formed in the bile, which put phospholipids and cholesterol and anything else that's around that's poorly soluble in water. These can go into that internal fatty microenvironment of the micelles. Well, micelles can also incorporate, and the green dots are just representing the end products of fat digestion, that is fatty acids, 2 monoglycerides, and also, very importantly, fat-soluble vitamins. Fat-soluble vitamins are A, D, E, and K. And the uptake of these fat-soluble vitamins into micelles is absolutely crucial, absolutely essential to allow us to absorb them. And there are clinical cases where, for some reason, these micelles are not formed properly, and people can end up with vitamin deficiencies because the vitamins cannot be solubilized. If they're not solubilized, they cannot be transported, and if they're not transported, they cannot be absorbed. So the green dots then are fat-soluble vitamins and the fatty end products of digestion. And these micelles, people describe them as like being little ferry boats with fatty passengers working their way through the sea, the aqueous environment in the small intestine. And it's a sort of a nice idea, but you like that sort of thing to think about. So these are able to move quite happily through the aqueous environment. Next to the cell, there's something called an unstirred water layer, which makes it even more difficult for these things to move. But because the bile salts on the surface of the micelle are amphipathic, they've got their water-loving face outwards, then they're happy enough to move through this layer. And randomly, they're going to approach the apical membrane. The ferry boat comes to the docking site, if you like. It doesn't actually dock in the sense of you might have heard about in other cases, but it comes very close. And these fatty passengers are able to then disembark when they're right up against the cell membrane, and they can move out then. So the free fatty acids move out 2 monoglycerides, and I've lumped everything else together, the vitamins and the other fatty molecules around us, etc., fatty etc. out here. So that's been the difficult bit so far. Getting these things across the cell membrane should be relatively easy, because you've got a lipid bilayer in the membrane, and you've got fat-loving molecules. So the idea then is, okay, it's just simple diffusion to get these fatty acids, etc., across the cell membrane. And you can probably tell from the way I've said that, and the next thing I'm going to say is what? There have been other suggestions, and a couple of papers that I just brought an abstract from here, very recent years. People are talking about something called fatty acid transport protein, number 4. There's a whole family of these fatty acid transport proteins, and that maybe simple diffusion of the fatty acids and these other things across the membrane is not the only way in which they can be taken up. So yes, it's still probably true to say there is simple diffusion, but there may be other specialized mechanisms as well. However, when you look at another one around about the same time, and it says, no, that's not probably true. So I don't know. There may be. Let's leave it at that. There's certainly simple diffusion, and there may be some special transport mechanisms also for these end products here. What we do know is once they get inside the cell, something a bit strange happens. You've got fatty acids and two monoglycerides going into the cell. Then those back up into triglycerides. Sounds a bit odd. With the monosaccharides and amino acids, they leave the cell in that simple form. Here, the cell builds them back up into triglycerides. And so you have to do something about that. You cannot allow these triglycerides to build up inside the cell. That's back in an aqueous environment. So again, this potential problem of separating out into an oily phase. So what happens is that other droplets are produced called chylomicrons. So we had emulsion droplets, which were just physically, mechanically broken down from the fact that you actually took it in your diet. We've had micelles, which are produced with bile salts on the surface and the fatty environment inside. I forgot to emphasize this, but the shell of the micelle is not taken up, as shown here. The empty micelle, with the bile salt still on the surface, remains outside the cell. So it's only the content, the passengers, that disembark and go across the membrane. The ferry boat itself remains behind. It can be reused for other passengers, and eventually, remember that bile salts are absorbed in the distal ileum and then go into the enterohepatic hepatic circulation round again and can be reused. So we can't use micelles inside the cell because they're not there, but in these kind of microns have the same principle behind them, but the structure is actually different. They are mainly triglycerides in the center, and these etc. other fatty molecules, vitamins and so on, also will go in the center. And on the surface, not bile salts, but apoproteins, which are amphipathic molecules. They're on the surface. And I have in the next figure, from the comparison, there's a micelle, which is smaller, nanometers, with bile salts on the outside and then the other fatty things on the inside. And then the chylomicron, they're actually quite variable in size, but usually bigger than the micelle. And these have got the triglycerides, vitamins, etc. inside. Some cholesterol, phospholipids, but the main thing on the outside are these amphipathic proteins called apoproteins. And so the idea here then is that these chylomicrons can pass by exocytosis out of the backside of the cell, but they're too big to go into the blood capillaries in the villus. The end products of carbohydrate and protein digestion do pass directly into the blood capillaries, but these chylomicrons are too big to do that. But they are able to go into the lymphatic vessel because the cells making up the wall of the lymphatic vessel, there's more of an overlap between the cells. They can open up the flaps, and these chylomicrons are able to pass into the lacteal. The word lacteal sounds like it's something to do with milk. And the reason it got its name is that after somebody's eaten a fatty meal, if you look at the lymph draining the small intestine, it looks sort of cloudy, milky, because of the presence of these chylomicrons. And as you know, these lymphatic vessels, the lacteals, will drain ultimately back into the blood circulation, the lymphatic drainage going back into the blood circulation near the heart. So ultimately they are going to end up in the blood, but they've got a rather roundabout way of getting them. So the next figure I won't put it up, but that's a summary. basically what I said, maybe a few extra things put in there. And, okay, let's leave it there for now, and we'll finish up the small intestine.